I froze in the doorway, my heart racing. The person I trusted most in this world, my uncle, wasn't the man I thought he was. What I saw shattered every belief I had about our bond. The shadows in the room weren't just secrets, they were something far more dangerous. In that instant, I realized nothing would ever be the same again. How could I face him knowing the truth? My name is Emily, and I'm 23 years old. Growing up, life was anything but stable. My parents divorced when I was only 7, and since then I've been shuffled between homes, schools, and cities. When I was younger, I always dreamed of a life where I could just settle down, find my place, and focus on my passion, art. I'm a graphic designer, freelancing while finishing my degree. I thought I had finally found some stability when my uncle, Ryan, offered me a place to stay after my mom relocated for work. Uncle Ryan wasn't just family to me, he was my role model. He taught me to ride a bike, showed me how to stand up for myself, and even supported me financially when times were tough. To me, he was the epitome of kindness and reliability. When he married Sarah, I was hesitant. She was older, more composed, and had this way of making me feel out of place. But over time, we developed a civil relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. Living in their countryside home felt like a dream at first. It was quiet, peaceful, and so far removed from the chaos of my life in the city. My room, situated at the far end of the house, became my haven. I would spend hours sketching, designing, and dreaming about a better future. Sarah gave me advice on everything from cooking to managing a household. Slowly, the awkwardness between us started to dissolve. I thought I had found a balance, until recently. Something changed in the air. It was subtle at first, like catching the tail end of a whisper you weren't meant to hear. Uncle Ryan's lingering looks, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, and the occasional brush of his hand against mine. None of it felt accidental. I dismissed it as overthinking, chalking it up to my need to feel close to someone after years of loneliness. But deep down, I knew something was brewing, and it terrified me. Life in that house was supposed to be simple, quiet, and safe. I thought I knew who Uncle Ryan was, until that night shattered every illusion I had. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Uncle Ryan had always been warm and affectionate, but lately his gestures seemed different, more deliberate, more charged. I noticed the subtle ways he would linger when we were alone. His eyes would lock onto mine just a second too long, or his hand would rest on my shoulder a moment more than necessary. It was nothing outright inappropriate, but enough to leave me feeling uneasy. Then there were the nights when Sarah wasn't around. She often traveled for work or spent evenings with her friends. On those nights, the house felt emptier, and Ryan's attention seemed more focused on me. It started with casual conversations over dinner, but they grew deeper, more personal. He asked about my dreams, my fears, my thoughts about life. It was flattering, in a way, to have someone care so much. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind his kind eyes than simple concern. One evening, as I was working on a project in my room, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. The sound of his approach made my stomach twist, not out of fear, but anticipation. When he knocked softly and peeked inside, I quickly closed my laptop, feeling as though I'd been caught doing something wrong. "Just checking in," he said with his usual calm smile. But the way his gaze flickered over me made my pulse quicken. "Don't stay up too late, okay?" I nodded, muttering something about deadlines. As he lingered in the doorway, I could feel the air between us thicken. Finally, he left, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Something was changing, and it scared me. Over the next few weeks, the tension only grew. Sarah was away more often, leaving me and Ryan alone in the house for hours, sometimes days. I started noticing small things that I hadn't before, like how he would make excuses to be near me, or how his compliments became more personal. "That dress really suits you," he said one day, his voice low and sincere. The way he looked at me sent shivers down my spine. Then there was the night I found him in the kitchen, sipping wine long after midnight. I had come down for water and froze when I saw him standing there, illuminated by the soft glow of the fridge light. He smiled when he saw me, motioning for me to join him. Against my better judgment, I did. We sat at the kitchen table, talking in hushed tones about everything and nothing. His gaze felt heavy, his words tinged with something I couldn't quite define. "You've grown into such an incredible woman, Emily," he said, his voice soft. "Your mom must be so proud of you." I thanked him, trying to brush off the compliment, but his words stayed with me long after I'd gone back to bed. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing. Was I imagining things? Was I reading too much into his actions? Or was there something real, something unspoken between us? The next morning, I found him in the living room, flipping through a photo album. He called me over, and we spent the better part of an hour reminiscing over old pictures of our family. At one point, he placed his hand on mine, squeezing it gently. "You're not alone, Emily," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'll always be here for you." His words were comforting, but the way he said them left me with more questions than answers. I wanted to believe his intentions were pure, but my gut told me otherwise. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to pull away. It was a quiet Friday evening, and the house felt unusually still. Sarah had left early that morning to visit her sister, and Uncle Ryan and I were alone for the weekend. I tried to stay busy, burying myself in my design work, but the silence was oppressive. I couldn't shake the growing tension between us, a pull that felt both magnetic and dangerous. After dinner, I settled on the couch to watch a movie, hoping to distract myself. Ryan joined me, carrying a glass of wine in one hand and a soft blanket in the other. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. I nodded, trying to appear nonchalant, but my heart raced as he sat down beside me, closer than usual. We watched in silence for a while, the soft glow of the TV illuminating the room. At some point, he draped the blanket over both of us, his arm brushing against mine. The touch sent a jolt through me, and I shifted slightly, unsure of what to do. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. The air grew heavier as the movie played on. I could feel his gaze on me, even when I wasn't looking. Finally, I turned to meet his eyes, and the look he gave me was unlike anything I'd seen before. It wasn't the usual warmth or kindness I'd come to expect. It was deeper, more intense, filled with a mix of hesitation, curiosity, and something I couldn't quite name. "Emily," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been so quiet lately. Is everything okay?" I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "I'm fine," I said, though the words felt like a lie. He reached out, his hand gently covering mine. "You can talk to me, about anything." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. I wanted to tell him everything, the confusion, the fear, the strange pull I felt toward him. But I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just sat there, staring at our hands. His thumb brushed against my skin, a small, tender gesture that felt far too intimate. "I've noticed something," he continued, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You've been different lately. Distant. I don't want you to feel like you can't trust me." "It's not that," I said quickly, my voice trembling. I don't know." He tilted his head, his gaze searching mine. "Don't know what?" How could I possibly explain it? The feelings I didn't want to acknowledge, the way his presence made my heart race, the nights I lay awake replaying every touch, every look, every word. It was too much, too overwhelming. Before I could stop myself, the words slipped out. "I feel different," I said, my voice barely audible. His expression shifted, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. He didn't pull his hand away, and I didn't either. The silence between us grew, thick with unspoken words. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to step back or let myself fall. "Emily," he said after a long pause, his voice low and steady. "Whatever this is, we need to be careful." I nodded, but my heart screamed in protest. Careful? How could we be careful when every moment alone with him felt like this? Like the world was narrowing to just the two of us, every other sound and thought fading into the background. As if on instinct, I leaned in slightly, closing the small distance between us. His breath hitched, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly he leaned in too, his forehead resting gently against mine. "This isn't right," he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. His hand moved to my cheek, his touch warm and steady. I closed my eyes, unable to resist the pull any longer. When his lips finally brushed against mine, it was tentative, hesitant, as though he was giving me a chance to pull away. I didn't. The kiss deepened, and the world around us seemed to fall away. His hands cupped my face, his touch both gentle and insistent. I felt like I was on fire, every nerve in my body alive with sensation. It was wrong, and yet, in that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense. When we finally broke apart, our breathing was ragged, our foreheads still touching. "We can't do this," he said, his voice trembling. "It's too complicated." "I know," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "But I don't want to stop." He closed his eyes, his hands still on my face. "Neither do I." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We didn't speak much, but the tension between us was palpable. Every glance, every accidental touch felt loaded with meaning. By the time I went to bed, I knew there was no going back. Something had shifted between us, and no matter how much we tried to deny it, we couldn't undo what had happened. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and tension. Ryan and I avoided being alone together as much as possible, but the electricity between us was undeniable. Every glance, every accidental touch, every moment we passed each other in the hall, it all felt like the air was crackling with something unspoken. I told myself it couldn't go any further, that we had to stop, but deep down, I knew it was already too late. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah was supposed to be out late with friends, and Ryan had gone to bed early, or so I thought. I was in the kitchen, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone, when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw Ryan standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep," he said, his voice low. I nodded, my throat dry. "Me neither." He stepped closer, the dim light casting shadows across his face. "Emily, we need to talk." I set my phone down, my heart pounding. "About what?" "You know what," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "About us. About everything." My stomach twisted. I wanted to deny it, to pretend there was nothing to talk about, but I couldn't. The weight of what had been building between us was too heavy to ignore. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Then let me say it. I've tried to push these feelings away, Emily. I've told myself it's wrong, that it can't happen. But every time I look at you, every time I'm near you," he trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I can't help it. I should have said something, anything, to stop him. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as he closed the distance between us. When he reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek, I felt my resolve crumble. "This isn't right," I managed to whisper, even as I leaned into his touch. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it doesn't change how I feel." Before I could respond, his lips were on mine, and all the fear, confusion, and guilt melted away. The kiss was desperate, charged with all the tension that had been building between us for weeks. My hands found their way to his shoulders, pulling him closer as every rational thought disappeared. We didn't hear the front door open. We didn't hear the footsteps approaching. It wasn't until Sarah's voice cut through the air like a knife that we realized we weren't alone. "What the hell is going on here?" We broke apart instantly, my heart plummeting as I turned to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. Ryan stepped back, his hands raised as if to calm her. "Sarah, it's not what it looks like," he said quickly, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "Not what it looks like," she repeated, her voice rising. "I just walked in on my husband kissing my niece. What else could it possibly be?" I felt like I was going to be sick. The room seemed to spin as Sarah's words sank in. This was it. There was no going back now. The secret we had been trying to bury had been ripped into the open, and there was no way to undo it. "Sarah, please let me explain," Ryan said, his voice pleading. "Explain what?" she snapped, her eyes blazing. "Explain how you could betray me like this? How you could do this to me, to us?" "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, his voice cracking. "It wasn't planned." I don't want to hear it," she interrupted, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "I trusted you, Ryan. I trusted both of you. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to try to make things right, but no words came out. What could I possibly say that would make this better? That would make her understand? "I need you to leave," Sarah said, her voice cold and final. "Both of you. Now." "Sarah, please," Ryan began, but she cut him off with a sharp glare. "I said now." Ryan hesitated, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He turned to me, his eyes filled with regret. "Emily, go upstairs." I'll talk to her." I nodded numbly, my legs feeling like lead as I made my way out of the kitchen. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear their voices behind me, muffled but still filled with anger and pain. I shut the door to my room, sinking onto the bed as tears streamed down my face. How had it come to this? How had we let it go so far? The guilt was suffocating, but beneath it was something else, a lingering ache, a part of me that still wanted him despite everything. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't deny it. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The house felt like a war zone the next morning. The silence was oppressive, heavy with everything that had happened the night before. Sarah hadn't spoken to either of us since she demanded we leave the kitchen. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, her devastated face flashed in my mind, her voice echoing with anger and betrayal. I stayed in my room, unsure of what to do. A part of me wanted to pack my things and leave, to escape the mess I had helped create. But another part, the part that still clung to Ryan despite everything, didn't want to run. I felt trapped, caught between guilt and longing, shame and the remnants of something I couldn't name. Around noon, I heard a knock on my door. My heart leapt, but when I opened it, it wasn't Ryan. It was Sarah. She stood there, her arms crossed, her face pale but calm. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat on the edge of my bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, and I didn't dare to break the silence. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I trusted you, Emily," she said, her voice steady but trembling slightly. "You were like family to me. I never thought this would happen. I didn't mean for it to," I said quickly, my voice breaking. I don't even know how it happened." "That's not good enough," she said sharply, her eyes narrowing. "You don't just accidentally cross a line like that. You made a choice, a terrible, selfish choice. And now we're all paying the price." Her words cut deep, but I couldn't argue with them. She was right. I had made a choice, and now there was no undoing it. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "What happens now? I don't know, Emily. I don't know if my marriage can survive this. I don't know if I can ever look at Ryan the same way again. Or you, for that matter." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced them back. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Maybe you didn't," she said, standing up. "But that doesn't change the fact that you did." She left the room without another word, and I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands. The weight of her words crushed me, but what crushed me even more was the realization that she wasn't the only one I had hurt. I had hurt myself too. Whatever I thought I felt for Ryan, whatever connection I thought we had, it wasn't worth the pain it had caused. Later that evening, Ryan came to my room. He looked as broken as I felt, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. He closed the door behind him, sitting down on the chair across from me. "I talked to Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse. She wants me to leave." My stomach sank. "Leave? As in move out," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She needs space. And honestly, I don't blame her." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to beg him to stay, to fight for their marriage, for their life together. But another part, the selfish part, didn't want him to go. "What about us?" I asked before I could stop myself. He looked at me, his expression pained. "Emily, there is no us. There never could be. What we did, it was a mistake. A horrible, unforgivable mistake." His words felt like a slap, but I knew he was right. Whatever connection we thought we had, whatever feelings we had acted on, it didn't justify the damage we had caused. "So what now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Now we try to pick up the pieces," he said. "We try to move on. Separately." The finality of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. I nodded, tears streaming down my face as he stood and walked to the door. "Take care of yourself, Emily," he said softly before he left. That night I packed my bags. I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Not after everything that had happened. As much as it hurt, I knew leaving was the right thing to do. The next morning, I said goodbye to Sarah. She didn't say much, just a curt nod as I walked out the door. I didn't see Ryan again. He had left before I woke up, leaving behind only a brief note apologizing for everything and wishing me well. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions, grief, guilt, and a faint glimmer of relief. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I could never let something like this happen again. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to find my footing. I moved into a small apartment near campus, focusing all my energy on my studies and freelance work. It was the only way I knew to keep my mind from spiraling into the guilt and regret that lingered like a shadow. Nights were the hardest. The silence of my apartment was deafening, and memories of what had happened played on a loop in my mind. I kept wondering how I had let things get so far. How had I ignored all the red flags, the warnings from my conscience that screamed at me to stop? No matter how much I analyzed it, I couldn't justify what I had done. I had betrayed Sarah's trust, shattered the bond one thought I had with Ryan, and most importantly, I had compromised my own values. One day, as I was cleaning my apartment, I found a photo of my family tucked into one of my sketchbooks. It was from years ago, back when things felt simple, when my relationships were untouched by the complications of adulthood. Seeing that photo brought tears to my eyes. It reminded me of who I used to be, of the kind of person I wanted to be again. I started going to therapy shortly after. It wasn't easy to open up about what had happened, but I knew I needed help to make sense of it all. My therapist helped me understand the patterns in my life that had led me to this point. The loneliness, the desire for validation, the need to feel wanted. She didn't excuse my actions, but she helped me see how I could learn from them. One thing she said stuck with me. You're not defined by your mistakes, Emily. What matters is what you do next. I took those words to heart. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I reached out to my mom and some old friends, reconnecting with people I had drifted away from. I poured my energy into my art, channeling my emotions into my work. And for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like myself again. As for Ryan and Sarah, I don't know what became of them. I didn't reach out, and they didn't either. It was better that way, cleaner. I knew they needed time and space to heal, just as I did. I could only hope that they found a way to move forward, whether together or apart. Looking back, I've learned some hard truths. Temptation can creep in when you least expect it, and it's easy to justify things in the heat of the moment. But every choice has consequences, and those consequences ripple far beyond what we can see. I've also learned the importance of boundaries, of knowing where to draw the line and sticking to it, no matter how hard it feels. Most importantly, I've learned that forgiveness starts with yourself. I've made peace with what happened, not by forgetting or excusing it, but by accepting it as a part of my story. It's a painful chapter, but it's also one that has shaped me in ways I never imagined. If I could go back and undo it all, I would. But since I can't, all I can do is move forward, carrying the lessons with me and doing my best to live a life I can be proud of. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Could you forgive yourself, or the people around you? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Ones that push boundaries, explore emotions, and leave you questioning everything. There's so much more to come, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next.